Please welcome to the stage the Executive Director of Sustainable Culture Lab, Barrett Pittner.
Hey everyone. Hey. So let's get it started. My name is Barrett Pittner. I'm a philosopher, author, educator, and the executive director of the Sustainable Culture Lab. My work focuses on the intersection of philosophy, culture, race, history, and language, with a specific goal of combining these disciplines to help us create a more sustainable and nurturing present and future. However, prior to becoming a philosopher, I was a journalist. And in August of 2015, I wrote an opinion column for the Daily Beast titled, "Okay, this Trump thing isn't funny anymore." Back in August, Trump was just a new candidate. No one really even entertained the idea that he could become president. So this was quite early. In fact, this was the first mainstream news article that compared Donald Trump to fascism. The tipping point moment for my editors, because they had some resistance about me publishing this at first, the tipping point moment wasn't when Trump supporters were saying white power at his rallies. Excuse me. Yep. But instead, when a group of Trump supporters beat up a Mexican immigrant and said, quote, "Donald Trump is right. All these illegals need to be deported." Once the rhetoric was directly connected to violence, the comparison to fascism became undeniable, and I was able to publish my story. That was 10 years ago. In 2021, I published my first book, The Crime Without a Name, Ethnocide and the Erasure of Culture in America. Ethnocide means the destruction of a people's culture while keeping the people. And in my book, I use this term to describe the transatlantic slave trade and the intentional, multi-century-long agenda by European colonizers to destroy African culture, but keep African people so that they could build a chattel slavery system in the Americas. This is ethnocide. Ethnocide was one of the tragic building blocks of this nation, but without the precise language or a singular word, it becomes much, much harder to articulate and understand our society and create solutions for this normalized cultural destruction. As I said, my work combines philosophy, culture, race, politics, history, and language. And today I want to speak to you about another topic that touches upon all of these issues. I'm here today to speak with you about a topic that all of us know, at least we think we know. This is a topic that people have given their lives for. Millions of people have fought for it, and many have sworn their lives to defend it. This topic shapes the very fabric of our society and defines much of our lives. The topic that I'm here to speak with you about is freedom, and specifically two different iterations of freedom that I call freedom from and freedom with. The tension between these two types of freedom has influenced the United States since the Civil War and still defines our politics and society today. America has two clashing forms of freedom, but we only have one word for freedom: freedom. This is like only having the word liquid for describing oil and water. We will never be able to properly understand freedom if we do not have the words for describing it. So let's fix this rather seismic and profound problem. Freedom from is the desire to be free from someone or something. For example, if someone is in an abusive relationship and they want to leave that relationship, they want to be free from their abuser. And this dynamic works at both the micro and the macro level. For example, the American Revolutionary War happened because the American colonists wanted to be free from their abusive relationship with the British. Taxation without representation was a form of abuse that the colonists wanted to be free from. Likewise, The struggle to abolish slavery and colonial oppression is also freedom from. Abolition is a fight to liberate people from their oppression and to abolish those oppressive institutions and societal norms. Freedom from is a very natural expression of freedom, and it is often a society's first iteration of freedom. However, if freedom from remains the dominant expression of freedom for a society or individual, it will eventually become toxic, abusive, fascist, and authoritarian. Let me explain. Freedom from is dependent on being liberated from an evil other. There must be an other who's denying you of your freedoms. This other could be a person, a group of people, or even just an idea. This other could be big government or the deep state. It could also be people of color, immigrants, Muslims, Jews, socialists. Adherents of freedom from will proclaim that this other poses an existential threat to their freedom. And they will condone the use of force to suppress this other. America's relationship with guns and our rampant gun violence is directly related to our reliance on freedom from. It's not surprising that the Americans who celebrate gun ownership and are always ready to use lethal force against an other often describe themselves as patriots or defender of freedom, akin to the American colonists who fought the British. Violence against the other is a core principle of freedom from. Since freedom from focuses on liberation from the evil other, it does not teach people how to exercise or practice their freedoms in a sustainable and nurturing way. So when this formally liberating, yet irresponsible, immature, and violent iteration of freedom begins to collapse, it needs to create an other, a scapegoat, or an enemy to project its problems onto. The practitioners of freedom from do not want to believe that they are destroying their own freedoms. So they need to fabricate a scapegoat whom they can blame. By creating the scapegoat, an enemy, or another other, the defenders of freedom from can now justify the harming of the other in the name of freedom. Freedom will allegedly return once the other has been removed, oppressed, or put in their place. Freedom from, which may have started as a genuine and authentic act of liberation, will eventually turn into an Orwellian situation where freedom also equals terror. Freedom from can create perpetual warfare in the name of freedom. We can see this reality in our current national crisis. The Department of Defense has already been renamed the Department of War. Warfare will allegedly give us freedom. Trump's immigration policies and ICE enforcement are also expressions of freedom from. The American people will supposedly become free again once immigrants have been removed and we are free from them. American conservatives have long been proponents and advocates of freedom from, but they just call it freedom. America's culture of mass shootings and political violence is also freedom from. When freedom comes from the absence of an other, it's inevitable that people will conclude that the killing or erasure of an other will become an act of liberation. Killing your classmates, a random person on the street, or a political figure whom you disagree with will be viewed as exercising one's individual freedom within freedom from, so long as you believe that their existence was denying you the freedom that you believe you deserve. At this point, I think all of us should be able to see how freedom from can create fascism, tyranny, and other forms of oppression, authoritarianism, warfare, and violence. We can see how freedom from can regress into the destruction of freedom. This realization about freedom from and how freedom from can destroy freedom creates a profound American problem because freedom from has been the dominant concept of freedom in the United States since the Declaration of Independence. We have always wanted to be free from something so that we can be free to do whatever we want. Yet, since freedom from is our dominant concept of freedom, we end up cultivating another manifestation of freedom from once we have liberated ourselves from our abuser and are free to do whatever we want. We do this because freedom from is what we call freedom. This is why violence and division have long been the tragic norms of American life. Terror has been the price all of us have been forced to pay due to the toxicity of freedom from. Our attachment to freedom from creates a destructive cycle that we still have not escaped nor transcended. Again, there is nothing wrong with freeing yourself from something toxic or abusive. But it is also vitally important that once you obtain your freedom, you create a new type of freedom that is not dependent on the existence of an evil other. Without this evolution, you cannot preserve, sustain, and nurture the freedom you fought so hard to obtain. This is where freedom with comes into play. Freedom with is the act or practice of being free with other people. It is a simple yet profound idea. The last line of my book is, freedom is other people. And this is another way to understand the transformative power of freedom with. Freedom with is not about individual freedom, and it's not about collective freedom, and it's also not about pursuing freedom. Freedom with is about creating and expanding freedom. For example, I have a young son and a family. My goal is to be free with my family for the rest of my life. Also, my parents and sister are in the audience today, and my goal is to also be free with them too. Sure, as a parent, husband, son, brother, there are things I don't want to do. But I do not think that I will become free if I'm free from them and the sometimes boring and exhausting aspects of sustaining and nurturing a family. The goal is to be free with them, and this goal influences how all of us interact with each other. And as our family evolves and changes over time, the act of being free with each other will also evolve. It will expand and grow. Freedom with also expands to your friends and your community members. Freedom with is expansive. This is the type of freedom that you practice every day. It's a freedom that you create and not a freedom that you pursue. As members of a family, we're simultaneously individuals and part of a community. So freedom with cannot be reduced to merely being about individual or collective freedom. There you go. I didn't get there. This is the hip. So, yeah. Woo. All right. So, this is freedom with at a micro level. But what does it look like at a macro level? How could freedom with reshape a nation, and especially a nation as large as the United States? Is it even possible? How could freedom with even exist within a society so attached to freedom from? To answer this question, we have to go back to the 1800s and the era after the Civil War. We have to go back to Reconstruction. Reconstruction is arguably the most important era in American history. Yet tragically, most Americans know very little about this era. Reconstruction invented civil rights as we know it in America. It created the Department of Justice to ensure that all Americans could exercise their civil rights. This era abolished slavery, extended citizenship to the formerly enslaved, and gave voting rights to black men. Reconstruction added 3 new amendments to the Constitution, And we cannot underestimate the seismic impact of these amendments and how prior to the Civil War, it would have been unimaginable to believe that the United States would have added 3 new amendments to the Constitution by 1870. Of the 12 amendments that preceded the Reconstruction Amendments, 10 of them were the Bill of Rights, and they were ratified in 1791. From 1792 to 1864, the United States only added 2 amendments to the Constitution. So it would be fair to say that few, if any, Americans imagined that they could add 3 amendments in the 5 years after the Civil War. I honestly, and I'm not exaggerating, could talk about Reconstruction for days. But one of the most remarkable things about Reconstruction is that I believe this era redefined American freedom. This era extended freedom to people of color. It was an era defined by America deciding to be free with people of color. They obviously did not call it this at the time, but I believe that Reconstruction birthed freedom with in America. The Emancipation Proclamation and the 13th Amendment meant that Black Americans could be free from enslavement. But Reconstruction did not stop there. Being free from oppression was not enough for leading a life of freedom. Reconstruction took a remarkable leap because it transitioned from freedom from and into freedom with. This does not mean that Reconstruction gave up on abolition or dismissed the liberating impact of freeing ourselves from slavery. Abolitionists like Frederick Douglass also helped implement Reconstruction. Abolitionists became Reconstructionists too. The creation of freedom with meant that they understood that freedom from alone would not provide us with the freedom that we needed. And that if we wanted to be truly free, we needed to not only invent a new type of freedom, but also be able to do both freedom from and freedom with when necessary. As Black Americans began interacting with the white Americans who supported the Union, it became clear that if Black and white Americans were going to live together or be free with each other, that American freedom needed to be redefined. This expansive, inclusive, and diverse understanding of freedom can be seen in the progress of Reconstruction. The 13th Amendment was progress, but there was still the need to create the Civil Rights Act of 1866 to help Black Americans exercise their freedoms. After that, the 14th Amendment created birthright citizenship and ensured that all Americans received equal protection under the law, due process, and the rights guaranteed in the Bill of Rights. Freedom then expanded into the 15th Amendment and voting rights for Black men. Again, like I said, I can talk about Reconstruction a lot, but I think it should be clear that freedom grew and expanded during Reconstruction. For me, this is what freedom with looks like at a macro and national level. As freedom with grows, so does freedom. And as freedom from grows, freedom contracts. It shrinks and eventually disappears. Today, the Americans who are protecting immigrants, defending their communities, and standing up to ICE are expressing freedom with. And they are combating the violent expression of freedom from. In America, the smallness of freedom from has always tried to destroy the expansiveness of freedom with. But as Americans who care about diversity and equality, it is imperative that we know that the freedom that we champion is freedom with. You can see freedom with in the civil rights movement of the 1960s. You can see it in the presidency of Barack Obama. You can see it in the great work being done by everyone in this room. We are currently living in a time where freedom from is on the rise again. And the violence and division that comes with it is radically transforming and regressing this nation. We must counter the regression of freedom from by championing and practicing the expansion of freedom with. Freedom with can reconstruct the United States into a more just, free, and equitable society. It has already reconstructed America once, and freedom with can reconstruct America again. Thank you for your time.